Okay, Chair, that's it, live streaming now.
Okay, well, we'll start then formally the agenda. First of all, with apologies, I know we'd taken those informally before, but we know that Kelly has apologised that she's likely to be in and out of plenary. Robbie Butler has also apologised and has allocated his vote to myself, and there are a couple of other members, two or three other members who may be in at later stages, Colin McGrath, Jim Allister, and Jerry Kelly, on that basis on it. I think as that would cover everybody else who's at the meeting, then if we move on to the next item, which is declaration of members' interests. We just ask if any members in relation to the agenda items today have anything to declare. Okay, if not, then we move on to item 3, which is the draft minutes of the meeting, which was held on the 9th of February. That's at pages 6 to 10 in the pack, and ask, are members content with the minutes?
Content.
Okay, if everybody's content, then just the next item, which is matters arising, and I think anything that would be matters arising, I think is largely contained within the agenda. So I'm assuming nobody else has anything else that they want to raise in relation to that. Move on then to agenda item 5, which is the committee effectiveness and collaboration briefing on the draft CLG report. And we'll come to that in a wee second or two. I suppose members may well be aware that there was due to look at the draft CLG report by CLG yesterday, but that was unable to happen because of quorum. But the report itself then is contained at pages 13 to 188 of the meeting pack. And obviously, members agreed at the meeting on the 9th that representatives to today's meeting to brief members on the draft report. So we have Kevin Peelan who's the clerk assistant, and Trevor Allen. And so just ask them maybe to give a briefing to the committee.
Okay, Chair, thank you very much. Myself and Trevor will brief you today on the report. Trevor has been very much involved right from the very beginning in this report, including the drafting of the terms of reference. So Trevor will take you through some of the background on that, the terms of reference, how we've collated our information, and then perhaps I'll have maybe an overview of some of the recommendations and how we would hopefully intend to take the recommendations forward, and we'll maybe come back at the end to the issues in respect of CLG as well. So Trevor, do you want to kick off there?
Indeed. Thank you, Chairman. Members, as Kevin said, I will take you through the process that led us to this stage where CLG producing the draft report on strengthening committee scrutiny. So the report of the RHI.
Trevor, could you just if you, I think maybe just the connection you spoken. If you just speak up just a little bit, just in there, I can hear you, but I don't know if members might have. We'll be picking up everything just in relation to that.
Okay, certainly, Chairman. My sound isn't great at this side, so hopefully you can hear me. So the report of the RHI scheme was published in March of 2020, and it made recommendations around the strengthening of Assembly committees to increase scrutiny and to help ensure that systematic changes were made and sustained, and also that the Assembly considers what steps are needed to strengthen its scrutiny role, particularly as conducted by Assembly committees in the light of lessons from the RHI scheme. The CLG agreed in March of 2020 to review committee scrutiny with a view to identifying how the recommendations of the RHI report could be implemented to strengthen the scrutiny role carried out by committees, particularly in relation to the scrutiny of primary and subordinate legislation by statutory committees. So in May 2020, CLG agreed the terms of reference, scope and methodology of its review. The terms of reference are as detailed at page 10 in the draft CLG report that members have already received. And the terms of reference broadly relate to examining how scrutiny is currently undertaken by committees, examining the approach to scrutiny in other legislatures, including staffing and other resources assigned to this role, the identification of innovative approaches that might improve scrutiny, and identifying training needs, and also the assessment of resources available to committees to enhance their scrutiny role. The methodology included benchmarking against other legislatures, seeking research papers and briefings from the Assembly Research and Information Service, taking the views of MLAs and their support staff, of Assembly staff and of others as appropriate, and producing a report of the findings. The scope of the review included adherence to the terms of reference and methodology, and that the implementation of any recommendations would depend on them being accepted, their prioritisation in the short, medium and long term, and also the cost implications. The scope also included the need to put in place a mechanism to review the findings to ensure they deliver their intended objectives. So to arrive at the report that you've received, CLG received briefings from the Examiner Statutory Rules in September of 2020 and September 2021, and also from Assembly's Research and Information Services in February and September of 2021. And the papers that they briefed CLG on are annexed to the report for your information, members. The Clerk and Members Support Office, that's my office, held a workshop with committee clerks in February of 2021 to seek their views, and also sought the views of members and their support staff via a questionnaire in June of 2021. And finally, the views of officials in other jurisdictions were sought during a conference in March 2021 of the Parliamentary and Assembly Procedural Officials Network. So on the basis of the information received from all of those briefings and from feedback from relevant stakeholders, the draft report that you've received was developed for consideration by CLG. CLG was due to meet on the 15th of February of this year to consider the report, but quorum wasn't achieved. However, CLG agreed by correspondence to write to all committees and to parties and independent members seeking their views on the draft report. And the reviews expressed that we have received to date are also annexed to the draft report. So, Chairperson and members, that's how we got to the draft report and where we are now. So I'll now hand over to Kevin, who will take you through the content of the report.
Thanks, Trevor. Members, hopefully you get a flavour for just how comprehensive we've endeavoured to be in order to sort of collate evidence, analyse evidence, and then on the basis of the evidence, make a series of recommendations. Now, there are 33 recommendations in the report. These break down into 7 key areas: the scrutiny of subordinate legislation, pre-legislative scrutiny of primary legislation, scrutiny of the passage of primary legislation, so for committees, the committee stage, and post-legislative scrutiny. So there are 3 other areas, and that's the availability of members' resources, engagement and innovation, and the role and powers of ESR. So we've for ease of members' consideration and really for our own, we're broken down into those areas. Now, I'm sure if you've looked at the recommendations, you'll see that there's probably things there that you think, don't we do that already? And in some instances, committees do. But the role of CLG is really to look at best practice and to have as far as possible, a standardised approach across all scrutiny committees, so that there's no difference in the way committees are doing things. So there's quite a number, as I say, 33 recommendations that we feel that if implemented would enhance the scrutiny role of committees. Now, CLG, in the members, as Trevor has indicated, we've had difficulties getting quorum for a detailed discussion on this, but some of the comments that we made have indicated that members are content with the recommendations. There is just a bit of concern about the imprimatur of what is a chairperson's liaison group as opposed to a formal committee of the Assembly, in taking the recommendations forward. So we have suggested to CLG that there are certainly things there that are, most of the things arguably are operational in nature, but certainly internally there are recommendations there that we believe that we could take forward as Assembly officials. But there are other recommendations there that will require discussion and agreement with colleagues in the Executive Office across all departments. So, for example, some of the issues in regard to pre-legislative scrutiny, we've referred to following the department's consultation on the bill, that they would produce a draft bill and go further out for consultation and engage with committee in that. Now, that's clearly not going to happen overnight. and require, as I would say, further negotiation. Other things that are clearly much simpler, for example, having a traffic light system in respect of subordinate legislation, where we have some stat rules, for example, that deal with upgrading, so per se, in the Committee for Communities. Whereas others will be much more complex, RHI being one of those, where you're dealing with new policy and a whole new mechanism with very significant funding requirements that one would maybe would identify as being red, that would require a lot more time to deal with that committee. I'm sure you've all been in statutory committees where you're perhaps getting SL1s and SRs on the same day to consider. So we're looking at how we can improve that system. But again, some aspects of that may require a whole different approach in terms of the current process. So what we're hoping to do then is, broadly speaking, so break this down in terms of bringing the recommendations forward and implementing the recommendations, is that we feel that there are things that we can do as Assembly officials to implement quite a number of the recommendations, but others, for example, refer to the committee and procedures. And indeed, there's one recommendation for AERC. I don't have it before me. Trevor, you referred to it earlier when we were having the chat. But
it was recommendation 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was the potential in the proposal for committees to be given amending powers in relation to subordinate legislation. I recommend that AERC considers how this could be facilitated.
So within, I think within the consideration by CLG, there we were looking to be able to take a number of these recommendations forward ourselves, but also make referral on to other Assembly committees, committee and procedures, and ARC being a case in point, in order to implement some of the others. However, given ARC's role certainly as a strategic objective, as far as I'm aware, in terms of considering committee effectiveness, I think we've proposed to CLG that in this briefing, we would suggest that ARC, at the very least, continue to monitor the implementation of the recommendations in this report, or make that recommendation to the incoming AERC committee to liaise with CLG on the implementation of the recommendations, and potentially to consider whether indeed there is a more formal role, essentially providing the imprimatur of a formal Assembly committee in taking some of these issues forward. Clearly, some of these issues may be slightly more political in a sense, in terms of changing primary processes for both primary and subordinate legislation. Again, pre-legislative scrutiny, which we don't really do, and post-legislative scrutiny, which we certainly don't do, certainly not as a standard. So we're hoping that AARC will consider that today, and perhaps referring to that in its legacy report, so that there is continuity, between this mandate and the next, and that AARC in the next mandate continues to have input into the implementation of some of these recommendations. That really, Chair, is all I want to say. I haven't planned to get into the detail of each of the recommendations.
No, I understand
CLG hasn't done.
No, I know, and I think it does create perhaps a slight degree of complication for us even within AERC, because we're obviously kind of receiving the report, but it's actually CLG's report, and CLG haven't, I suppose, had the opportunity really to, well, they've had the opportunity, but haven't been able to avail of the opportunity, maybe more accurately to say, to be able to come to final conclusions themselves. And I suppose within our legacy report, we will also kind of reflect where CLG has reached in relation to its report, because where we are today may not, things may move on between now and the end of that. Can I open up questions anybody has, if you want to indicate? I'm not seeing any indicators. I appreciate some of the stuff. Well, look,
Peter, can I come in?
Thank you. Oh yes, come on. Yes, come on in. Sorry, yes, didn't see. Sometimes the connection on fire away.
Yeah, just to talk to the report. I think one of the recommendations there, or one of the commentary pieces around this, was the fact that for effective scrutiny to take place in the committees, the departments have to be forthcoming with the information as much as the committee and the staff of the committee prize the information out of the departments. So I think I see this as a two-way approach and a parallel twin track approach, whereby the demeanour and the attitude of the departments must change as much as we become in the committees much more effective. One of those sides of the coin happening but the other not just won't cut it for me. So there has to be acknowledgement from departments, and to be fair, all departments with regards to especially subordinate legislation and the timescales for which they deliver that to the committee. Most of these subordinate pieces of legislation will always be technical in nature. So it actually, you could argue that it takes more time or just as much time to go through a SR1 as it does a clause in any bill. So I think there is a lack of disrespect and time appreciation, a lack of time appreciation that it should take for a committee to work through some of these very complicated matters, and that has to be taken on board. Thank you.
No, Paul, I think there's a very valid point there as well, which I think is, I mean, thinking about this again, not wearing an AERC or a CLG hat on in that regard, I think one of the weaknesses in our current system now is on subordinate legislation. Now, I think there's a political and legal issue about whether we can reach a point where there's amendments to subordinate legislation. I think that may take us into difficult legal territory. Mm-hmm. However, I think one of the concerns I have a little bit is, I think in terms of the balance sometimes where scrutiny happens on committees, we will get various witnesses in, interrogate those witnesses, give them lengthy sessions, and those are things are very important. But I think there's then a bit of tendency for a lot of committees, from my experience, to, faced with SL1s and SR1s, etc., to effectively almost just rubber stamp them without really any particular level of scrutiny or thought through. And I think, yes, some of that will come down to the level of information that comes to the department, but also maybe I think to some extent the priority and effectiveness of the committees themselves as well. It is about getting that rebalance there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think from that point of view, obviously, we will be reflecting on this in the I don't know if there's either anything just in relation to those points that or want to comment.
Jerry, your connection seems to have dipped there slightly.
You, Shane, on that regard, but it seems to be slightly. I'm being. Seems to have a little bit on that regard. You can hear me? Can you hear me? No.
Yeah.
Just you're cutting out there a bit, Chair, just on and off.
I know, on and off a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think from that, I'm just checking up that in relation to the points that Paul made. Don't know if either Kevin or Trevor want to.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think as I said just in the opening comments, I mean, on quite a number of these recommendations, it will be a two-way street with departmental officials, and that will require a lot more further discussion and agreement on how we move these forward. So some of the recommendations as written might actually change to some degree, although still achieving the ultimate objective. The timing issues for SL1s or SRs is can be a big issue, but when you get an SL1 and consider the policy, to when the department may bring SR forward can be short. So the opportunity for committees to consult with stakeholders or indeed with expert to obtain expert advice isn't always available to them. So again, that can be a significant issue where committees are under pressure. And I think coming up to the end of a mandate, I think particularly committees find themselves under considerable pressure to run through SL1s and SRs at pace, and potentially live to regret it. So there's a real that's a very significant issue for us, because while it may not happen, it may not have repercussions most of the time. We've only got to look at RHI and see, well, when it does happen, it can be monumental in its impact. So we will be hopefully in discussion with departmental officials to try to address both those issues. The two-way approach between receipt of information from departments has been an issue for us since the day I started, which was over 20 years ago. And I suppose in that regard, we will be meeting we're hoping to have a training session with Dallows as well, outside of the recommendations of this report, I should say, during dissolution. And hopefully we'll be able to enlighten one another as to what our requirements are, if these processes, and others indeed, are going to be a lot smoother in the future.
Yeah, Kevin, can I come in there? Just, and I don't know this. I don't know the answer to this question. That's probably why I'm asking it. So, we do realise that there's times when subordinate legislation can be time pressured. There could be things that need to be done on an annual basis. So that's going to be a difficulty. But there are things that come through subordinate legislation that isn't really time pressured, and maybe one-offs. And it strikes me that some departments may hold off, whilst they know what they have to do and have decided what they're going to do. They will hold off publishing that process, starting from the SR1s to the stat rules, until the very last minute, in order to, if you like, restrict the time at the latter stage of the process. Whereas a fair question for a committee would be, how long has this policy development been in play? And then why have you decided to bring it to us now? Yeah. And I suspect that happens quite often.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to have a healthy dose of cynicism when considering these things as well. Because it certainly, in my experience, it has been the case where the committee is under pressure and there's no real reason why the SL1 and SR have not been brought forward earlier. And it seems that it's a case that the sky will fall in if this SR doesn't go through within the next, week or so, whatever. So I've experienced that myself as a clerk, and you're just pushed down a cul-de-sac, and there's very little that the committee can do in those instances. Otherwise it's going to bear the blame.
Yeah. So just on that, Chair. Also, another tactic I believe they have taken part in the past is that they would throw a lot of SR1s at you at the same time, in the hope that you would only catch one of them, and then let the other ones drop with regards to scrutiny. So when you're juggling so much work, so there may have to be some sort of, if not rule, there should have to be some sort of agreement in place of a good time valued appreciation as to when you publish these subordinate legislation pieces, and then more flexibility in the committee to actually push it back and say, no, we won't look at that until our work commitments have eased. And that in itself will put pressure back on the department. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's valuable. Folks, by the way, I just indicate as well, I think because there's been a wee bit of problems with my connection, I put the camera off in the hope that maybe this might improve the sound side of things on that basis. Okay, I'd like to thank sort of Kevin and Trevor in relation to that. Obviously, we will be coming back, and this will be reflected then in the legacy report in terms of the progression of this issue. That'll be later on in the agenda. But look, I think it's been a very useful briefing that we've got from Kevin and Trevor, and thank them for their contribution. If I move on to the next item, which is the item 6 on the agenda, which is the other strategic priorities. Now, members, at the meeting on the 9th of February, it was agreed to ask the committee clerk for details of any policy issues that had been progressed by committees in the area of gender and diversity in the context of the Assembly and the Executive, or any policy issues that might be identified in legacy reports in areas of work for successor committees to progress. Now, there has been, I think, the initial bit you indicated, we'd sent out, I think, from the initial papers, talking about 4 responses. There's now actually been 5 responses received, which are part of the table papers, and the table papers replace pages 191 and 192 of the meeting pack. And indeed, particularly that reflects a late response that we've got from the Committee on Procedures. So just ask members first of all the content to note the summary of these responses.
Noted.
Okay. And also these responses will then be published as part of the committee legacy report, which brings us neatly on to, I think, to item 7, which is the committee legacy report. Now, the draft legacy report is at pages 194 to 214 of the meeting pack. The draft report details the work carried out by AERC during the length of this mandate, and also includes suggested areas that the next AERC may wish to consider. It also, I think, gives some statistical information. And I should say, in terms of the areas that are being looked at to be considered, these are all issues which have been at various stages raised in AERC. So there's nothing getting thrown in at the last minute in relation to that. So I would just ask Shane, the clerk, if you can give us an overview of the main areas contained within the report.
Yes, Chair. So the report follows a standard format that is applied across all the Assembly committees, and it includes, as you mentioned, the main areas of work that the committee has undertaken during the course of the mandate, and then also suggested issues for the successor committee to take forward in the new mandate. And there's also appendices on other information in relation to the committee during the course of the mandate. I'll just touch on maybe one of the main areas that's highlighted in the report, and then I'll bring Marie in on the other areas. The first there is the review of opposition entitlements, which the committee was one of the most significant pieces of work the committee undertook during the course of the mandate, and led to the Assembly agreeing its report. And there's 3 recommendations arising from that report that fall to the AERC to take forward in the next mandate. Recommendations 3, 11 and 18. They relate to a review of any opposition entitlements after they're implemented, at least 2 years after they're implemented. Also, consideration to be given to the creation of political or technical groups, and also consideration to be given to how adequate access to information could be provided for an opposition going forward. So those were the 3 recommendations, and members will recall that the committee commissioned research in relation to each of those, and also potential lists of sources of evidence, and also potential experts that might undertake the review. So all of that research was collated and will be published, if the committee agrees. The report will be published as part of the report with links to that. So that's really the opposition entitlements element of the report, and then I'll just ask Marie to come in to speak to the other areas.
Okay, Marie.
Hi. Okay, so the remainder of the report then deals with the additional strategic priorities, which was the designation and appointment of the First and Deputy First Minister, committee effectiveness and collaboration, and gender and diversity imbalances. So in terms of the work areas that have already been covered by the committee, we're simply setting out the detail of the strategic priorities and the documents that are going to be published. So the designations and the appointment of First and Deputy First Minister is published in the written evidence that we had received in relation to this matter. We'd gone out to academics. It's quite a niche area of work, so there isn't a huge amount of evidence, but this allows the committee to meet its obligation in terms of the motion on the stability of the institutions and referral to the Assembly and Executive Review Committee. It called on the ARC to report on the outcome of its consideration. So by publishing this evidence, that's meeting that obligation. In terms of the committee effectiveness and collaboration, we've just heard from CLG officials. The committee had, I suppose, it was awaiting the report by the CLG before they would take this matter further. And because the production of the report was delayed, there hasn't been a huge amount of progress made on that strategic priority. If we go to, and then of course we have diversity, gender and diversity in the Assembly and the Executive. The ARC carried out quite a significant piece of work in relation to this. It carried out a stock take of the work that's been done throughout the Assembly and most recently then committees. So all of that information will then be published. In relation to the areas of work that successor committees, the successor ARC might want to take forward, designations in the appointment of the First Minister, simply suggesting that the next ARC might want to take this work forward. And I think it's probably important to remember that this doesn't put an obligation on the next committee. It's this is persuasive, I suppose, more than anything. In relation to committee effectiveness, as I said, there was very little progress made under this strategic priority, but there are 2 paragraphs in the report. One, if the CLG report is published, to include a paragraph of text, and alternatively, if it's not published, there's a paragraph of text there. And I suppose if we could get an agreement that, if the CLG report is, if the status changes between now and the end of the mandate in terms of it actually being agreed by the CLG, we can adjust the text accordingly. And then gender and diversity imbalances in that area, it is simply suggesting that the next ARC might want to consider undertaking further work in this area with a view to making some recommendations to address any of the imbalances that are identified. I think that was everything there, but yeah. So just to go back, sorry, to the committee effectiveness, just to be clear, if the report is published, it is suggesting that the ARC considers the recommendation 7 that was mentioned by the officials, and that was how committees could be given amending powers in relation to subordinate legislation. And then perhaps the next ARC could look at the recommendations, the other recommendations, and assume a monitoring role with regard to the implementation of them, or even identify some of the ARC itself might be best placed to take forward. So I think that was everything from.
Okay. Thank you, Maria. I'll come back to the CLG issue just in a moment there. But anybody have any questions they want to clarify or bring forward in relation to that? I'm not seeing any indications. I suppose just make 2 points before we get into the formal process. We're going to, I suppose, just go through it paragraph by paragraph. Having said that, there's a number of cases. What can be done is things grouped together so we can get formal approval. I suppose then as well, I would make just 2 other small caveats. That first of all, is it accepted by everybody, as Maria's outlined, there may need to be a slight degree of adjusted wording on the reference to the CLG, depending if there's any changes on the CLG side between now and the completion of the report. I presume members are happy enough to give a little bit of leeway in terms of that slight degree of tweaking of wording, so it can reflect if there's a change in the circuit. Agreed with that? Okay. Yeah. And then secondly, I should say as well, before we get to the paragraph, I should also indicate as well, working on the assumption that when everything is then finally sorted out and formatted, there may need to be paragraph numbers added, etc. Just in terms of that little bit of formatting that will need to take place. Again, that will be just a tidying up exercise, but again, that give a sort of a green light to officials to be able to do that. So with those in mind, just work through the report from the cover onwards. And I suppose, first of all, I'd like to ask if members are content that the title page, the table of contents, the list of abbreviations, and powers and membership of the committee as drafted stand part of the report. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Great, okay. Then we'll now work through the review of the 2017 to 22 mandate committee work areas section of the report. I'll put first of all the question that members content that the paragraphs on review of opposition entitlements stand part of the report. Great, okay. Then I'll put the question then that members content that the paragraphs on additional strategic priorities stand part of the report. Members agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. Then the next section, the paragraph on designations and appointment of First Minister and Deputy First Minister, stand part of the report. Members agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. Agreed. Members content then that the paragraphs on committee effectiveness and collaboration stand part of the report, subject obviously to the remarks we made earlier about maybe there may need to be slight adjustment depending upon where we land with CLG. Members agreed with that? Okay.
Yep.
Agreed. Are members content then that the paragraphs on gender diversity imbalances in the Assembly and the executive stand part of the report? I'm conscious of the fact that I'm putting that to members of the committee who are all male at the moment, but members content with that? Okay. Great. Now, we'll now work through the section entitled Suggested Issues for Successor Committee section of the report. Obviously, again, remind members that as regards these are making suggestions. By definition, obviously, any future AERC, we cannot bind a future AERC as to what precisely they do, but this is about suggested issues. So, first of all, are members content that the paragraphs on opposition entitlements stand part of the report? Okay, members are agreed with that. Are members content that the paragraph on designations of the appointment of FM and DFM stand part of the report? Okay, agreed. Are members content that the relevant paragraphs on the committee effectiveness stand part of the report? Again, agreed. And are members content that the paragraph on gender and diversity imbalances stand part of the report? Okay. We then move on to the appendices. Are members content that Appendix 1, which details the changes in membership, stands part of the report? Okay.
Yeah.
Agreed. Then are members content that Appendix 2, which is the mandate facts and figures, subject to any updates if there's any tweaks on final figures, stand part of the report? Members agreed? Okay. Then I'd also put then Appendix 3, which is the expenditure for the period 1st of September 2017 to the 1st of March 2022, subject to updates in the final figures, stand part of the report. That means if there's any budget left over, we can, as we're now past the 1st of March, we can spend willy-nilly at this point until the end of mandate. But members content with that?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that concludes all the various elements of the report. So I'll just ask then, are members content that the report of the Second Assembly review AERC for the 2017 to 2022? Members content?
Content.
And then are members content then that the committee's legacy report is approved then for publication?
Content.
Content? Okay. Okay then, that concludes that item of business. Not much more to do. So correspondence, there's one item of correspondence at pages 216 to 218 in the meeting pack. And the correspondence is from the Speaker regarding the scheduling of plenary business until the end of mandate. I think that's been circulated fairly widely. Are members content to note?
Content.
Okay. Next item of business is AOB. I don't have any other items of business. Do any members have any items of business?
Chair, just do we have another meeting before the end of March?
No, there's none scheduled, Militia, I think.
No, that's grand. Okay, Chair, that's grand. Thank you.
In fact, yes, I should say the next item on the agenda, which is date, time, and place of next. I suppose I did advise that there isn't a meeting scheduled. Obviously, any tidying up exercises we'll do, and if anything needs to be signed off, myself and the committee staff will do that. But can I just suppose in conclusion, I just want to thank all the members of the committee for their contribution during this mandate. I suppose there's been some of the committee have been there a lot longer than I have, but certainly I've found everybody's approached this in a very fair-minded and spirited and public-spirited way. But also I want to, just as chair, thank you, but also then place on record, particularly I think, and speak on behalf of the committee as well, particularly thank the Shane and Marie and all the staff for all their help during this period. You've been very professional, made our jobs extremely easy. But I want to pass on then our thanks to yourselves in that regard. Okay, folks, if there's that, I think concludes the business. So I'm sure we'll see each other in other. George, did you want to say something there, just?
Chair, just to wish you well. No, you haven't been too well this last wee while, but just to wish you a speedy recovery.
Oh well, look, thanks so much. Well, I'm at the moment, folks. As you don't know, I'm self-isolating because I tested positive, but I don't have any particularly heavy symptoms or anything. So it's just supposed to make sure I don't infect anybody. And I suppose also, George, just on behalf of the committee as well, I know that I don't know what the fate holds for any of us in terms of the election, but I know you're stepping down at the election. So particularly, yes. I think I want to thank you for all your contributions, not just in this committee, but on others as well down the years on that regard. So I suppose before we all come to self-congratulatory on that basis on it, I suppose we just at that point and thank you everybody, and we'll end the meeting there. Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.